Victory will soon be ours. These Saxon dogs have nothing but bark.
Across the Straits of Dover, the bastard son of the Normans has staked his claim to the Saxon Kingdom of England, by right of his cousin, the late Edward the Confessor's promise. A coalition force of Franks, Bretons, Northmen, and even treasonous Saxons has sailed the Channel. Among them were the would-be king's noble knights, his companions, whose loyalty he had earned with promises of fiefdom. Upon his conquest of England did William engage in the great harrying of the north, wherein he worked tirelessly to depose the local Saxon dukes of the House Mercia and to wipe out the remaining forces of Harald Hardrada, who were ravaging the north themselves. With the harrying coming to an end and the war with Norway winding down, has William, no longer the bastard but now the conqueror, claimed his kingdom. Now comes the promised fiefdoms which had so motivated William's men, and our story refocuses on the newfound nobility of one Lénaïque Ridanger, a doctor that saved many lives during William's campaign. For his service, he was granted the counties of Wiltshire and Gloucestershire in August of 1072, and his story begins as a landed man of medicine and war. How Lénaïque chooses to navigate his complicated world of politics will decide both his and his future children's fate, but he's an intelligent man with much to gain from this new order in England. Will Lénaïque remain a humble earl in service to his king, or will he strike out on his own? For now, he's got smaller priorities. He needs a wife, and he needs to learn how to govern over these Saxons. It's a good thing he's a scholar, because these peasants seem to be uttering total and utter nonsense to him. Being a man of great scholarly acumen, Lénaïque knows that in this world the strong rule over the weak. But perhaps if he can gain some strength of his own, he could try to create a world free of the tyranny of the strong. Lénaïque's hope, his aspiration, is to one day rule a kingdom of his own, and although he hates to admit it, he might have to step on some toes to make it happen. The question is, how much will this doctor, who has sworn to do no harm, be willing to step on others to achieve his utopian dream? Let's find out. With his title to the land of Western Hwicce in his hand, Lénaïque rode alone to his seat at Salisbury. He was excited to see the Stonehenge, which he'd often heard of but never laid eyes on before. While passing through Abingdon and into Ramsbury, though, he noticed a distinct absence of, well, life. That absence was soon replaced by the familiar stench of death, and then Lénaïque remembered the price that was paid so that he and his Norman comrades could own this land. The harrying of the north may have been centered on the north, but the south wasn't spared the wrath of the bastard conqueror. Burnt-down shacks and pastures full of rotting animal corpses littered the land, and on occasion, a Saxon family struggling to rush into what shelter they have left at the very sight of a Norman. It was easy to forget that, although Lénaïque was only a doctor in the conflict, he was still very much so complicit in the Norman conquest of his now subjects. After some time, Lénaïque reached Salisbury proper, taking note of the ramshackle fort that he'd be calling home from now on. Luckily for him, it was built within eyeshot of the Stonehenge itself. The fort was in great disrepair, and there were 3 people at the entrance waiting for him, his bishop, Corrado, and 2 Saxon peasants staring down at their feet. Thus, Lénaïque encountered his first roadblock to rulership: language. The bishop greeted him. Ciao, signore, mi chiamo Corrado. Sono venuto dall'Italia per servirte e per servire il signore. Sounds like Italian, a language upon which Lénaïque has little grasp. Parlez-vous français, monsieur? The sound of the French language made the Saxon peasant shudder, and the priest sighed, realizing he'd have to speak French around here. Awkward introductions aside, this new lord's choice to not immediately strike down the Saxons was promising, and the Saxon housemates Wulfrun and Lefwin gave Lénaïque a tour of his new home. As they spoke to him in their crude tongue, he took notes, and it was obvious to them he was making an effort to pick up their language. What an incredible sight for the downtrodden Saxons. Upon finding his personal quarters, Lénaïque sat at his desk and began taking notes about his plans for the land. He satisfied himself with 3 goals to start. First, to find a suitable wife. Second, to learn the Anglic language, to connect with his subjects in ways the other Normans could never. And third, to acquire enough revenue to assemble an army, both for his own protection and to eventually gain some power within the kingdom for himself. In a realm like this one, a compromise between the ruling class and the ruled class is paramount to maintaining peace. Lénaïque understood this and took a Saxon wife named Fawn of a little-known family called Roe. The two at first couldn't even speak with each other, and Fawn was worried she'd be mistreated by her new husband, but Lenaik instead showed her his notes on the Anglic language and asked for help. Soon he went from not knowing a word to speaking some basic sentences. Goals 1 and 2 were going quite well so far, however, acquiring an income is proving difficult. The harrying has left much of the land difficult to work, and the people are still wary of tax collectors. Lenaik revoked the mining settlement of Saint-Briavel from Baron Adelard, a gluttonous cynic who doesn't exactly inspire the population. Watching a Norman be stripped of his titles to be replaced by an at least tolerable one was nice to see for many of the Saxons. After acquiring the mining settlement, Lenaik made a trip to Canterbury, looking to get in touch with the religious authorities of England. It's important that he project a pious rulership so that his subjects will know he's a just ruler who deserves his station. Along the way, he visited the borderlands between Mercia and Wales, as well as the great city of London. He asked one of his housemates, Lefwyn, to lead the trip so that she could help him get a lay of the land. He put an amazing amount of trust in her, giving her lead over the trip. It was just the two of them and a few pilgrims looking for company along the road. Along the path through Mercia, the desperation of the harrying remained obvious, but by this point, cooled. Ramshackle pastures were being rebuilt, and the occasional pastoralist passed by, clinging to their sole property with fear. Yet others did not pursue such honorable toils. The road was host to all kinds of undesirables, and one such man made his presence known. A Saxon was leaning against the tree next to the path, a strung bow laying beside him. Upon seeing Lefwyn and Lenaik approach, he raised the bow and informed them that this road was subject to a toll, for which the failure to pay would be punished with death. Was it wise to have taken this trip with no protection? Probably not, but sometimes a daring bravery could instead be called simple recklessness. Lenaik and his housemaid made eye contact, considering what to do. The toll was a king's ransom, and Lenaik would not pay it. He needed that money for his realm. Despite her seeming innocence and humble nature, Lefwyn had a plan of her own. She reached into a small pocket she'd sewn into her outfit, and from it did she draw a small knife.
Behind you!
The obviously ridiculous attempt at distracting the bandit didn't work, of course, but the loudness of her yell did startle him, and in that moment of shock, Lefwyn threw the blade at the man's head. It was a direct hit. Unfortunately, the bandit did manage to shoot his arrow, but his aim was off from the shock of the distraction, and so the arrow only hit Lefwyn in the hand. She was injured, but she'd saved herself and her lord from extortion, and with a quick mind, too. Perhaps she also was aware that there was a doctor right beside her, which gave her a little more risk-taking energy, and very quickly, Lenaik attended to her wound. The arrow was of poor construction and not particularly sharp. Lefwyn's wounds would likely heal without issue, although it would certainly hurt having a little hole in the hand. The two and their pilgrim entourage continued along the path to Canterbury with their connection deepened just a bit. The final major stop before Canterbury was London itself, which had remained relatively untouched during William's invasion. It's a bustling city by English standards, but it's marred by a militarized feel. It's clear the House de Normandy worries about its position along the Thames. Thankfully, worries about harassment from Norman guards around the city are easily assuaged by Lenaik's native tongue and accent. The doctor asked his housemaiden what the Saxon people thought of their king, and she said he was a vile despoiler. She continued, with a long tirade of the crimes that the king had committed, which by now were well known to all. What Lenaik took from the conversation was that there was a people to win over, if only one man could be toppled. At the same time, becoming the opposition to such a powerful king was a bad idea. Perhaps he could be both friend and enemy. He looked upon the king's castle, a titan of architecture compared to his own, and realized that he owed it to his subjects to at least try and depose this monster. He earned his land grant from the king by being a medic, and he did swear vassalage, but that oath would only really be broken if he engaged in outright treason. Nobody would have to know about the treason growing in his heart. Returning to the road to Canterbury, the southeast of the kingdom was comparably safe compared to the west. Kent was beautiful and prosperous, and the Canterbury Cathedral was full of pilgrims from around Europe and England. Just before arriving, though, a messenger caught up with the pilgrims and passed along the message that Lenaik's wife, Fawn, had fallen pregnant shortly after he left for his pilgrimage. The opportunity for a dynasty is now in the doctor's hands, and he'll spend his time in Canterbury considering what to do with that. Approaching the cathedral, there was a Norman preacher informing the people of the travesty of the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem. He talked of a world where Christians across Europe writhed in sin, but could earn themselves forgiveness by marching on the heathens. Surely, such bellicose preaching could never capture the hearts of true Christians. There were some glares here and there from the sight of a Norman and Saxon entering the cathedral as what almost seemed to be equals, but otherwise none would dare disturb the peace of a holy place. The unlikely pair stayed for some time, and Lenaik spoke to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Gervais. He was not exactly what you'd call a holy man, but he was nonetheless endowed with holy status. Lenaik nonetheless showed the proper respect due to an archbishop, and for his efforts received benediction. The doctor returned to Wiltshire, looking forward to seeing his wife. Lady Fawn gave birth to a girl, Marie, in August of 1073. To celebrate her birth, Lenaik hosted a feast, inviting William the Conqueror as an honored guest. Before the feast began, Lenaik appointed Lefwin his spymaster, believing the two had attained a certain trust. Despite his secret intent to take down the king's reign, Lenaik worked to befriend the king and his sons. Keep your enemies closer, they say. Although he failed to cement a proper friendship with the king, he did manage to make good friends with William the Red, whose heart was a little kinder than his father's. Before the king left the feast, though, Lenaik used his upbeat mood to get some business done. He offered to his king a new feudal contract where his domain would be redefined as a castellany with special council privileges. Lenaik was a shoo-in for a permanent council member, given he had the respect of the Normans for his doctoral abilities and the respect of the Saxons for his tolerance of them. William the Conqueror agreed, and immediately Lenaik took the position of court steward. More money means a larger army, and now he just needs a skilled knight to call his marshal for the future. He appointed the lowborn Edwin to be the Knight of the Green Arabian, so named for Lenaik's green tunic and strange Eastern medicines. To many of his peers, they often wondered if he were secretly from the Near East or something. Now that he's got a nice flow of cash via the mining settlement and his pay as a steward, and he's got a proud knight to lead his men, there only remains the right moment to seize power. Conveniently, King William appointed him the master of the hunt, and all sorts of things can go awry during a hunting trip, especially with the help of his wily spymaster, Lefwin. Lefwin and Lenaik form a sort of balancing foil to each other with regards to the plan to hunt King William. Lefwin wants it now, Lenaik wants it when it's right. First there needs to be trust, though. Being the new master of the hunt, Lenaik naturally hosted a hunt, inviting the king and once again seeking his friendship. While on the hunt for a wolf, William approached the doctor in good spirits. He had a boar spear in his hands, a tool which works just as well for a wolf as a boar, and he began the conversation with a light-hearted jab at Lenaik's receding hairline.
I see the noble life has aged you, good doctor.
Indeed, my lord.
You know, Lord Redon, I have great plans for this kingdom. I've often been cruel and ruled with an iron fist because it's important there be no questions of who the king is. Maybe I haven't earned the love of my people, but my sons, they don't have my reputation. I think the Saxons will warm to them quickly if they could just act a bit more like you.
My king?
You think your adoption of Saxon language and acceptance of them among your council has gone unnoticed? Were I in a position to so brazenly adopt the ways of my subjects, I would, because every king knows that power comes from the land and the people on it. But for the rest of my life, I will be the Norman conqueror. I hope that one day you might rub off on my sons a little. It would certainly secure my house's rule for, well, I don't see why not a few centuries at the least.
The king gave Lenaik a warm pat on the back and continued the hunt without waiting for a response from him. A wise man would pick up on the fact that what William has told him was more a royal command than a sort of admiration. Nonetheless, the warmth of the interaction created at least a perceived bond between the two. Back to the creature of today's hunt though, the wolf surely wasn't too far ahead of them. Upon sighting the beast, Lenaik took aim as master of the hunt and landed the shot, killing the wolf. Everyone cheered, and the wolf was prepared and loaded up to be taken back to Wiltshire. William stopped the carriage and took his knife to the wolf's paws. "These claws," he declared, "will be the prize which marks my master of the hunt as a true and loyal subject." During this little ceremony, Lenaik spotted Lefwin just behind a tree in the distance, a bow drawn. It seemed she was ready to take a shot, but now wasn't the right time. "And I do humbly accept this honor, my king. Thank you." She couldn't take the shot if her liege lord was in the way, so Lefwin let the arrow go in the opposite direction, hitting a rabbit or something.
Looking to get yourself in the limelight, doctor? Be wise not to confuse our closeness with a presumption of equality.
It seems the king let this one slide, but certainly he didn't appreciate being upstaged like that. Before the party could move out, Lefwin returned with the rabbit she had shot. The king scoffed at her, perhaps more performatively than Lenaik would have once thought, and the doctor conferred with his spymaster. "You cannot kill him yet, Lefwin. The time isn't right."
I wouldn't have actually done it, my liege. I was just thinking about it.
She seemed almost sad, as if she did in fact wish she could have done it, but knew that she couldn't because she understood the Norman retribution against her people would be far too great if she were caught, which she nearly certainly would have been. All Lenaik could offer was a smile and some sympathy. His time will come. The various attendees of the hunt prepared to leave and return to their courts while Lenaik hung up the wolf pelt he had earned. The next couple months saw him slowly accruing revenue and spending it on more men-at-arms. A mixture of Saxon archers and a smaller retinue of Norman heavy footmen, his army is small, but sometimes a group of well-motivated men can outperform even 3 times their numbers. Unfortunately, to the south in Winchester, a plague of smallpox had broken out in the winter of 1075, but Lenaik, a doctor, knew well to quarantine any from plague-ridden regions and avoided catching any disease himself. Doubly unfortunately, though, did King William decide that during this time of plague in the south of England, it would be a good time to host his proper coronation. But then he thought about it. Perhaps he needn't betray the king at all. He was obliged to attend the coronation, of course, but he took an alternative route, avoiding the plague of Winchester. However, he also made sure that among his entourage at the very far back, isolated, there would be a couple squires and handmaids that he knew were infected. They were already consigned to near certain death anyway, so they might as well be useful in their last days. Before leaving, he said goodbye to his dear wife Fawn, who would rule as his regent and take care of the kids. He'd grown to like Fawn, but ultimately he spent very little time with her between all the work he had to do as lord and doctor. Nonetheless, he did trust her. The trip to London for the coronation was uneventful, and Lenaik explained the plan to get William infected with smallpox to Lefwin, who loved the idea. The two led their entourage in good spirits and arrived in London in December of 1075. Already were some of William's sons infected, and it seems that the king's lack of understanding of contagious disease was taking grip of the court. Shortly into the coronation, the king himself caught it too, presumably from one of his kids, and of course he called on his favored doctor to help him.
Doctor, this pox, what can be done?
The doctor kept his distance, knowing it's a highly contagious disease, but answered, "Well, my king, you need rest, water, and time. Your body will heal or it will succumb. All I can do is ease the pain." In reality, there were treatments Lenaik could at least attempt which have limited but well-documented success, but the king doesn't need to know that.
And my sons? The same for them?
That's right, my lord. That's all that can be done.
Well, I'm a king, and in the coming weeks and months, I will finally receive my divine right. I will beat this disease because God has ordained that I am to be king, and if not me, then my sons. And if not them, then my daughters. I will recover, or I will be crowned before this disease takes me.
His resolve was admirable, but beneath it there was fear. There was fear that he had plunged an innocent land into turmoil and suffering just to die of disease before he could even get his crown, and that the price he'd pay for that sin would be the lives of his sons too. "I'll let you rest now, my king." William motioned for him to leave, and so the coronation preparations continued. In the coming weeks, the first casualty to the disease was Prince William the Red, who had foolishly entered a duel with some upstart lord over nothing. The combination of his injuries and the smallpox left him dead at just 19 years of age. Despite the tragedy, the king continued his ceremony, and the procession began with the offering of gifts from the vassals. Although King William's skin was pale, he was dressed in a truly regal outfit, commanding authority with his beautiful purples, reds, and blues that adorned him. Nonetheless, the speeches and offerings of his subjects were often interrupted by violent coughs. Finally, the ceremony came to its climax with the Archbishop Gervais of Canterbury placing the crown upon a kneeling King William. When prompted to stand and begin his rule as king, though, William struggled to get off his knees. Rather than going up, he had gone down. The crown rolled off his head, and for just a few brief moments had William the Conqueror truly been King of England. Now he's dead. The anarchy has begun, as William had not named an heir, but naturally, the crown would go to Prince Robert Curthose as the eldest son. He was also the obvious choice because he hadn't yet contracted smallpox. He took the initiative, ending the coronation for now and sending everyone home, saying there will be another coronation in the future, but for now the king must be buried and his family must mourn. At this point, the Norman hawks of England probably wouldn't descend into total civil war, as many of them had themselves caught the plague. Nonetheless, Lenaik knew that with how lacking in caution the de Normandies had been with this disease, they'd all soon pass in good time. He returned to the road, heading home to Wiltshire, awaiting messages from London. It turns out, before he even arrived home, he wasn't aware, but Robert Curthose had already caught the plague too. He died shortly after the doctor stepped into his home, leaving the kingdom in the hands of a new king, King Richard, who had recently been exposed as a sodomite. Now this is a king around which a revolution can be organized. King Richard too was sick, but not as deathly so as his father and brothers. As if he were tempting fate though, King Richard immediately began the new coronation ceremony, demanding attendance from all the realm's lords. Many of them had only just gotten home, but again did they leave their lands to see their new king. By this point, Lineik was worried he too might catch the plague if he wasn't careful, but keeping up appearances would be everything for taking advantage of this anarchy. He rode once again with Lefwin at his side.
You may claim to be a doctor, but you're more like a wizard making these kings drop like flies without even lifting a finger.
I didn't do it, Lefwin. It was God's pestilence which was cast upon their house. I merely stood by without helping.
So through inaction, you've done a greater action for England's future than any Norman before you. Sounds like magic to me.
Despite her misunderstanding, he appreciated the admiration, and the pair and their entourage arrived in London once more. By this point, it was much harder to avoid the infected, given pretty much everyone was infected, and within a few days of arriving, the worst had come to transpire. Lineik caught the smallpox. This is a highly deadly disease, but being a doctor, he knows a little bit about how to treat it. The doctor, in secret, treated his disease for fear of being accused of withholding life-saving doctoral advice if he did it in the open. If there's one positive to this, it's that now he can mingle with the sick without fear of catching the disease. He has it now, after all. During the ceremony, Lineik was approached by King Richard, who somewhat resembled his father, at least in terms of their sickened white skin. He made a strange offer to the doctor, though, asking if he'd like to spend time with his mother, Matilda of Flanders. She had gone into a deep depression with the death of her husband and sons, and Robert seemed like he just wanted someone to keep her busy. The wordless widow wandered the garden with Lineik at her side. After about an hour of silence, she finally piped up. "He's going to die too, isn't he, Doctor?" He wasn't sure what to say. Nothing is certain, but yes, it's quite likely both he and I will die to this pestilence." The Queen Mother sighed, and dismissed Lineik, sending him back to the coronation. In his plotting to eradicate the family for the good of his subjects, the Doctor had to steel himself against the gut-wrenching guilt. It's possible he could have saved the entire family had he tried to treat them, but it's also possible nothing would have worked. He thought of that, as he continued to treat his own disease, knowing it was doubling or perhaps even tripling his chances at life. Miraculously, Richard did survive his illness, likely due to its lesser strength over him than his brothers and father. He was crowned the King of England, and lived to tell the tale. Lefwin approached Lineik then, despite his protest that she would get sick.
It seems like we'll have to handle this one ourselves, Doctor.
He didn't have anything to say, so he said nothing, but Lefwin took the silence to mean that they'd have to plan it out another time. To Lineik, King Richard's utter debauchery and sin would probably be enough to motivate the kingdom's vassals against him, but they'll all need time to mourn their plague-ridden dead. Nonetheless, one more dead king surely wouldn't hurt. The Doctor recovered from smallpox before the coronation's end, giving him and King Richard a certain shared story. They both survived what seemed unsurvivable, and yet the two didn't really connect. King Richard was not exactly easy to get along with. Upon returning home, Fawn had been worried Lineik wouldn't make it, and gave him a big hug. Although the two barely had any time to spend with each other, little moments like this made the both of them quite happy. One day, Fawn might just be England's queen with how things are going. She felt pregnant once more, and if she can have a son, Lineik's potential as a king would grow even more. As the realm entered a new normal, King Richard appointed Lineik the Marshal, and with the letter of his summons did he include a note that in the near future war will be coming. It's obvious that the lords oppose their sodomite sinner king, but he fully intends to maintain his grip on power. This is good. It's all going as planned. In March of 1077, Fawn gave birth to another daughter, Stephanie. Although not a son, more daughters means more alliances, and once they come of age, more loyal courtiers to ensure the smooth running of the kingdom. The war that Richard predicted came to be in January the following year. It's a liberty war, with the vassals seeking further autonomy from their wayward king. As Marshal, Lineik was entrusted with training and preparing the troops, however he put in little effort to ensure the king's men were in fighting shape. Perhaps he'd have been executed for his incompetence were King Richard not so busy leading his men. Unfortunately for him, London fell to rebel forces in July of 1079. Despite that, the king would not surrender. After pretty much the entirety of Richard's domain was occupied, he did surrender to the rebels in February of 1081, ending a years-long conflict and seeing his rule basically entirely undermined. Seeing that he lost the war, Richard looked to figure out why, and believed that perhaps he'd chosen the wrong marshal. Rather than potentially incite another war, though, by imprisoning and executing Lineik, he reassigned the Doctor to his role as steward. That worked fine for the both of them, but there was certainly no love lost between the two. Despite the peace that captured the kingdom now, It was a peace marred with constant scandal. King Richard did an awful job at hiding his sodomy and liaisons and adultery from the court, and the bishops of the kingdom, both Saxon and Norman, were fuming. This time, from the church was there a fomenting rebellion. All they needed was a righteous man to rally behind, and at that point, they actually chose Lenaik. The doctor was not especially pious, nor was he especially sinful, but became known among the people as someone with a kind heart, and came at the recommendation of various Saxon bishops and mayors, as well as Norman lords, who had seen his prowess during hunts. He was the perfect candidate for a proper king. The Pope Alexander II himself sent a letter, granting Lenaik the right to call himself King of England. Now he need only enforce that right. Peace, tempestuous as the past years have been, is within sight. If only the House de Normandy could fall just a little bit faster. With his papal writ in hand, Lenaik entered his home, unsure of what exactly to do with it. Naturally, his spymaster Lefwin already knew what it was that he was holding.
Do you really think you can take on the king?
Honestly, no. But I think the king might just step down once he sees how unpopular he is.
This king? Not a chance. My liege, I know you might be loath to accept this, but if Richard dies, the kingdom goes to one of his sisters. And I can tell you this, those poor girls have no will to fight for the crown. Richard is the de Normandy's last hope. With just one more death, a very deserving one, I might add, you can have your bloodless crown.
Bloodless. He considered his short walk with the Queen Mother. He hadn't really spilled any blood, but he certainly could have stopped the beloved children of a grieving widow from dying painful deaths had he intervened. He got lucky, is the truth, but now that Richard, a man nearly half his age, has the throne in good health, he may have done more harm than good. Richard is a lot like his father in terms of the ruthlessness, but he lacks the ambition. He's a debaucherous adulterer with little regard for advice or caution. The kingdom will suffer under him, and it will also be Lenaik's fault. As if she could read his mind, Lefwin planted the seed of murder into it.
Sometimes, to correct a mistake, another must be made.
To think this girl once cowered before him, and now she was advising how he could get away with murder.
You're still the master of the hunt, and our plan was for William, but Richard will probably be an even easier hunt. Considering the recent civil war, if anyone found out he died, I doubt there'd even be an investigation. What do you say, Doctor?
I suppose it's time to host a hunt then. And so the realm's master of the hunt sounded the horn, calling all brave lords and the king to engage in some royal pleasantries. The hunters gathered in April of 1086, ready for a fun excursion into the lush hunting grounds of Wiltshire. Edwin, the prestigious Saxon knight of the Green Arabian, led the hunt this time, giving Lenaik time and focus to take Richard down. Last time they hunted a wolf, this time a stag, but when King Richard had gotten away from his royal guards for some privacy, Lenaik caught up with him. "My king, how goes the hunt?" "Dreadfully. I can't seem to find a single lord worth my time here. I'm instead left with my failure of a marshal. Let's hope you don't lead us to bankruptcy too as steward." It's amazing how Richard can be so unaware that his behavior is quite likely to lead to his death. One motivated lord is all it would take, especially given how easily he has let his guard down. Before the pair could engage in further conversation, though, they were interrupted by the arrival of Lefwin, who must have been following.
Pardon, lords, but I do believe the stag may have passed by here recently. Just look at those tracks.
What tracks? The king grunted, looking at the ground. In a flash, Lefwin had a knife in her hands and looked to Lenaik. Once before, she had threatened the life of a king during a hunt, and that time, Lenaik stopped her. This time, although surprised for sure, he let her have the honors. A knife to the throat, one clean cut, and King Richard fell to the ground gurgling.
How's about we resume the hunt before anyone sees us so close to His Royal Highness?
Agreed. And so the hunt continued with little interruption. No one really noticed the king was missing until, by the time the stag had been loaded onto a wagon, the distinct lack of a kingly presence was felt. One Lord Drogon, the hunchback cripple of Cornwall, piped up.
"Whatever happens to him, let's just hope he doesn't come back, right, fellas?"
The lords all laughed, while Richard's sisters and mothers stood there, no sadness left to give.
"If the ladies would like to search for him, let them. Me, I'm going home. Whatever happens to this kingdom, I'll be Launceston, waiting for this great drama to unfold. Another great hunt, Lord Reindinger. Let's hope your hunting grounds continue to prosper."
Certainly no one would hold him to account for his improper speech, if only because the man's very existence held him to greater account than any words ever could. It's useful, though, to have someone like that around, someone who can say the quiet part out loud. Being it was his hunt, Lenaik felt it necessary that they at least recover the body. He started a search, canvassing the area, but subtly guiding the royal guards towards the body. Richard was quickly found and his body loaded up to return to London. His royal jewels and crown were removed to be passed on to his sister, now Queen Cecilia. As is tradition, Lenaik hosted a feast for the realm, serving up the venison of the stag they just hunted. Some lords came, some didn't, but the queen and her sisters did attend. The purpose of this feast is no mere tradition, though. Lenaik, at the toast of the feast, brought out his papal writ, wherein the Pope promised the kingdom to him. He decided he would create a succession crisis at this moment. Lords and ladies, they say when it rains, it pours, and I have some unfortunate news. During the reign of the recently departed King Richard, this realm went through civil war, it went through scandal, and it endured the difficulties of a king whose status was far below that of a proper monarch. In that time, we nobles, we have been dissatisfied. The priests and bishops, they bemoaned a kingdom of sin. However, we remained loyal to our king, hoping he'd shape up. He never did, and he paid the price for that. I was intending to give the king a little more time before presenting this document, which I now hold in my hand. He unfolded the papal writ. I had hoped it would not come to this, but now we are faced with a choice. We either call King Richard, posthumously, a rightful king, and allow his title to pass to his sister, as is the law of the land, or we declare his rule a travesty, a mistake, and we convene to find a new king. The feast's crowd clearly preferred this option. I present to you an option for one such restoration of a rightful monarch, and I present it to you with the backing of the highest office in Christendom. I present to you this papal writ, endorsing me to replace King Richard. I had kept this hidden for months, believing that perhaps our king could show us that his deposition was not necessary, but he lived a sinner and he died one. Now I ask if this queen, Cecilia, would like to continue her rule in the shadow of that reputation. Let this house of sin end, and with the approval of the realm's lords, hand me the responsibility of putting this kingdom back together. The tension in the room was immense, and Cecilia, pregnant with her first child, feared some of the looks in the eyes of the men staring at her expectantly. She thought about her family, and all the trauma they'd been through. The death of their father and their sons. Its reputation was already too much to bear. Wordlessly, she stood up, placed the crown on the table, and left the feast. I suppose that's an answer, then.
Oh, just put the damn thing on and let us continue eating. God, I can't wait to have a normal king.
Earl Drogo's words cemented Lenaik's rule, which began on November 27th of 1087. Just 19 years after William the Conqueror's arrival in England has his family been thoroughly dissected and replaced by a much more popular king. No lords opposed him because they were tired of this long game of king roulette, and because the papal writ was indeed a good reason to let him rule. After some feasting and celebrating with his wife Fawn, Lenaik returned to his chamber, satisfied that he'd done the right thing. Now that he rules, the lives of Saxons and Normans alike will be greatly improved. It will begin with a great coronation and a rededication to the virtues of peace and acceptance. It's a curious thing, a king which promises peace, because the inherent nature of rulership is to dominate. It's arguable that the king's very mandate as lord is to direct the violence of the realm not towards non-existence, but simply towards success. Not to be a pacifist, but instead to be a successful warmonger. Peace is, in Lenaik's mind, a Christian value and something he aspires to, and his bid to take down the tyrannical House de Normandy without war was successful. But now that he's king, there are ceremonies to be had. England has a bad history with coronations in its recent time, going through kings and queens rapidly. This time, though, it will be a coronation for a king to last. King Lenaik made an oath to shape the realm and bring prosperity. It was exactly what was expected of him, and the Normans and Saxons stood with him. What should ensue is a perfect peace. It's time to focus in on family. The king and his wife Fawn have had 3 daughters, Marie, Stéphanie, and Evelina, all of whom are still children. Fawn is now too old to have kids, meaning Lenaik has failed to have a male heir, but a strong enough daughter might be able to keep the throne. Marie, the oldest and current heiress, is shaping up to be a bit more explosive than her father, but similarly stoic and brave. Lenaik arranged for her betrothal to the Danish bastard prince Niels in the hopes of the two perhaps having some sons to legitimize their further rule. Stéphanie is still young, but she's already expressing her desire to become something great. As a second-born daughter, her station is a bit low, but there's still time for the winds of change to blow in her direction. Finally, there's little Evelina, who is too young to say much about yet, but she's a curious child, asking a million questions every day. The doctor's daughters form a happy family, especially now that their father is a king. One perk of Marie's betrothal into the Danish family is that the alliance gives Lenaik some security against anyone who might threaten his throne or family, and at the same time, he can send his army to Denmark to aid them in their wars to ensure his own army doesn't get lazy or bored. After a few years of peace and raising his kids, Lenaik was pressured by some of his northern lords to engage in just one war, a small war against Alba. The Scots and Gaels past Hadrian's Wall have held control over a tiny piece of the proper Kingdom of England, and the Norman lords assured him that with just one war, the kingdom would be secure, and that then he could have his total peace. Despite his opposition to war, it made sense to secure the border so as to prevent any border conflicts in the future. It's also unlikely that such a small war would cause any meaningful devastation, and so Lenaik conducted his first war as king, which he won in just 23 months. Alba itself has been in utter turmoil lately, swapping between a local Gaelic family and the Scottish Dunkeld family. If he wanted to, Lenaik could probably overrun the entire kingdom, but he only demanded the return of the rightful territory of England and swiftly returned home upon having it surrendered to him. On the way home, the doctor heard news of a group of refugees from Iberia, some Muslims. Instinctually, Lenaik ordered the realm to welcome these refugees, both because he understood the plight of those abandoned from their homes, and because they could be converted to Christianity, which is of course the duty of any good Christian. Some might disagree with that though, especially the Christian leadership in Rome. For some time now, the will of the pontiff has been leaning towards war, and Lenaik is reminded of that preacher he saw in Canterbury almost 30 years ago. Maybe a new violent streak will soon take over the Catholic Church. That aside, there's still secular violence to worry about. The Kingdom of France, under Robert IV, has declared war, looking to reclaim Man. What's interesting about this is that upon hearing the war was declared, Lenaik looked to his advisors and pointed out, rightly so, that the contested territory probably wasn't worth fighting over, and that really, for a long-term peace, it would be best if these border disputes were resolved. Nonetheless, he had to maintain face and sent a token army to engage in an honorable battle just to show the French that England isn't a complete pushover, but after a day of fighting, Lenaik sent word to the French king of his amicable surrender and hopes for future prosperity on both sides. Lenaik simply let Man go, leaving no soldiers there, and included in his letter to the French king that they'd both be better off keeping the peace. The two would indeed have to let peace reign between them when in July of 1095, the Pope announced that the entire Christian world would be asked to mobilize and prepare for an expedition to Jerusalem. Naturally, this aggression was anathema to Lenaik, but he wasn't quite ready to just outright oppose the Pope, so he half-heartedly prepared a force to send overseas to Jerusalem. The crusade began properly in July of 1096, but King Lenaik dragged his feet. He didn't want to send the sons of his subjects off to die in a needless war. Instead, he considered if, perhaps, he should oppose the Pope. The absolute authority of the pontifical office had, at times in history, been questioned, and those that did were usually labeled heretics and left in the dust of history. Thing is, Dr. Lenaik doesn't really know all that stuff. He's a doctor, not a theologian, and he knew what a heretic was, of course, but to him a disagreement with the Pope didn't necessarily classify as heresy. So, at the height of the crusade, Lenaik made it known that he would not be sending any support because he could not stand needless bloodshed. Soon he was accused of harboring Muslim heathens and that perhaps he should be excommunicated. By July of 1099, the crusade had raged on for a few years and things were going well for the Christians, and even some of Lenaik's own lords encouraged him to not provoke a papal response and to just send some token force. So he did. His men landed in Gaza in August. However, upon stepping off their boats, the Muslims had just surrendered Jerusalem to the Crusaders. Thanks to that, it appeared as if Lenaik had arrived just to steal glory while doing none of the fighting, and because of this, he would be ostracized in the larger Catholic world, and by the Pope too. The sad thing is that the trip home was long, and Lenaik had indeed sailed out with his men, believing that it would be wrong to send them to fight without their king at their side. Well, before he could get home, his wife Fawn passed away. Nothing in particular took her, she just passed away in her sleep, surrounded by her beloved daughters, but not her husband. For this, the king would have little want to forgive his Catholic peers, and their pressure on him to sail to the other side of the world for a fight that meant nothing to him. He hosted a funeral for his wife, the once Castellan, now Queen Fawn. He made the eulogy for her in English rather than French, which felt fitting given she was a Saxon. However, this was also an important symbol for the evolving nature of the realm. It'll be a much longer process than just one speech, but the mixture of Norman rule and Saxon population is creating a new culture, which might one day be called English. Lenaik himself will go down as the first Norman lord to address his subjects in their own language, but he'll certainly still be remembered as a Norman lord. Maybe in another generation or two, his lineage might be regarded as an English one. After the funeral, he steeled his emotions and prepared to travel to the Holy See, to speak with the Pope and get him to understand why his crusades will only beget more violence. Peace is the Christian way, and far be it from a mere king to tell the Pope what Christianity is about, he has to do something though. He then began his pilgrimage to Rome. He intends to knock on the Pope's door and give the man a piece of his mind. At this point, Lenaik might sound kind of naive, if anything, for continuing to believe that papal authority could be questioned, for continuing to believe that their motivations were simply misguided, instead of being entirely based on greed. Regardless, he arrived in Rome and asked for a papal audience. The papal guards let him in, and there he was, Pope Benedictus X. It was the previous pope, Alexander II, that had given Lenaik his claim to England, so he and Benedictus didn't have much history together comparatively. They went through the usual sort of pageantry, kissing the ring and announcing titles and so on. Entering the pontifical chamber of the Holy See, the rightful King of England, Lenaik Ridanger, of House Ridanger. He entered at the beckoning of the administrator. Holy Father, it's an honor to see you. He genuflected before the inheritor of St. Peter's Church and kissed his ring.
If it isn't the brave Crusader himself, I hear you and your men's arrival in Gaza struck so much fear into the heathens that they surrendered the Holy Land the same day.
He laughed a bit, showing great disrespect to the king kneeling before him.
So you have come to admit to the error of your ways. Perhaps you can fund the next crusade to earn forgiveness.
The cardinals watched the meeting with bated breath, as Lenaik, by now a 65-year-old man by the way, got up from the ground. Holy Father, I think you'll find I'm far too old to particularly care for the manner in which I'm spoken to. I have come here to tell you that these crusades, as you call them, are a disastrous institution, and one which will create a cycle of violence that this church might never escape. In my time on this earth, I've seen the horrors of war, and I've worked to prevent further horrors, at least in the lands where I have influence. Man is a violent creature by nature, I have no illusions about that, but the Lord teaches us to turn our cheeks and to embrace our neighbors. What you've done, crusading in the East, is opposed to that notion, and I must ask you to stop this violence. The Pope didn't say anything at first, but then he chuckled a little bit.
So a king reads one passage in the good book and thinks he understood the Lord. How presumptuous, how arrogant, how unchristian, to so dare as to speak for the Lord. You're far too old to be this self-absorbed, and let me remind you, King, that you are God's lieutenant in the place we call England, only because my predecessor allowed it. Do you not think I can strip you of that title on a whim?
Silence echoed through the papal chamber, some cardinals whispering a little.
I urge you, Linné, to turn around and head home. I urge you to prepare your men for another crusade, and to stop this presumption of superiority to the true inheritors of your Lord's Catholic Church. I promise you this. If this issue drops now and it dies here, and you return to this church, I too will let it go, and we can both continue to live good Christian lives in our own ways.
The Holy Father put his hand out for a shake as if to seal the deal, but Lenaik instead locked eyes with him, waiting for something.
And one more thing, Linné. I know you harbor heathens in your land. All of Christendom knows it. And you will make a show of removing them from your kingdom if you want to be welcomed back into this church.
This nonchalant advocacy for the uprooting and destruction of a downtrodden community, a suffering people who sought only kindness, made Lenaik's normally untouchable stoicism shatter. You are a disgrace to Christianity, and your judgment of people you've never met is a mockery of what I've always believed to be Christ's way. You will doom this church, and I will not be part of it. He took off his crown slowly, keeping his eyes on it as he held it. It calmed him. If I only hold this crown because it was given to me by your church, then I will return it. And when I return to England, we'll see who the King of England is. Crown or no crown, papal writ or no papal writ. He dropped the crown of England. It unceremoniously rolled past the Pope, and Lenaik turned to leave, determination filling his spirit. On the way back home, he considered his actions. Maybe he'd been too hasty to make such a powerful statement, but he knew that no man could ever push him to commit some kind of massacre against his own subjects. In another world, where Pope Benedictus kept his hand extended without that little additional caveat, this schism may have indeed fallen to the wayside. Instead, the crownless Lenaik returned home, had a new crown forged using English metals, and then spent the next 2 years poring over the Bible. The Pope did have one point, and that's that ultimately, Lenaik wasn't exactly a biblical scholar. He retreated into his studies, letting the realm more or less govern itself, which was fine with everyone. Currently, England is in a place of exhausted peace, with little will among either the lords or the people to really agitate for anything. Not that they have much to agitate for. Lenaik's rule has been quite just so far. Even those Ibadi refugees from North Africa were settling into England. They were encouraged to embrace Christianity, but not necessarily pushed towards it. Nonetheless, their way of life would have an inherent impact on the realm. Ibadism is a faith which lacks a proper leader, instead deferring leadership to local imams, similar to a bishop or priest in Christianity. Now, obviously, a small group of refugees won't be enough to totally influence Lenaik's new interpretation of Christianity, but it does give way to a world where breaking with religious leadership could be possible. That was the true influence of the Ibadi faith on England's Christianity, the belief that it could be autonomous from Rome. In August of 1103, Lenaik formally declared that England's churches would be no longer subject to papal authority. The Christianity of England, colloquially called the Peaceful Church, was one defined by its opposition to Rome. It is pacifist to the end, scholarly and evangelical, but tolerant. These Christians play the long game, believing that all will come to Christ if they witness enough good acts from good hearts. Lenaik appointed the first pope to reign over the faith from Canterbury, a man named Hugh, but after that, the church would pick its own popes with an identical ceremony and hierarchy to that of the Roman Catholic Church. It's important to emphasize that this church is only very slightly different from the Catholics, with its actual doctrines and beliefs being nearly identical, but merely differently interpreted. Nonetheless, the difference, even if small, is enough to light a heated rivalry between the two. It is a rivalry which Lenaik lit, but which he'd be unlikely to finish, given his soul was loath to remain in his dying body. He spent the next 7 years ensuring his daughters were ready to rule, and he intended to test them, even if he'd never be there to judge if they'd passed. He decided the realm would be split between them, with Wales going to Stephanie, London to Avelina, and the crown of England proper to Mary. He taught them to rule with love for each other and their people. He taught them that they'd always be stronger together than apart, and that the maintenance of their peace will depend on how well they take in these lessons. By 1110, his daughters were full adults themselves, with husbands and, at least for some of them, kids. Lenaik ensured that the daughters were married matrilineally to keep the Ridanger name alive. He passed away in August that year, with a smooth, well-understood succession in place. Yet no matter how secure a succession, greed can easily overcome even the strongest minds. The oldest, Mary, Queen of England, is a hot-headed stoic. That might sound paradoxical, but essentially, her stoicism is a veneer, often easily broken by even slight annoyances. Nonetheless, she aspires to be like her father when she can. She has no children of her own, despite her decades-long marriage to Niels of Denmark. Some say it's because Niels is a bastard, others because Mary is barren. She likes to think it's just bad luck. The middle child, Stephanie, Queen of Wales, is probably the most talented of the three. She took up doctoring like her father, but she loves to party, travel, and waste money. A candle which burns twice as bright lasts half as long, they say, and Stephanie might one day be proof of that with how much she does with her time. Maybe it's how she copes with the death of some of her children, of which she has quite a few. It seems she and her Czech prince got along quite well. The youngest, Aveline of Essex, is the most mercurial of the three. Some say she's cursed by the devil with her cold, lifeless stare and bursts of anger. Despite her atrocious attitude, she seems to have the healthiest coping mechanisms, taking her anger and stress out in sports and athletics. All three of them are, of course, followers of their father's peaceful church, but how much they believe in it is something they'll have to tackle as their reigns mature. The kingdom of peace has come, but conflict is only human. In time, the kingdom might return to its normal self, but these daughters are promising. That will have to be another story, though. The last chapter in any man's life is how he's remembered. It's his legacy, and the impact he has on the people close to him. Unfortunately for some, and fortunately for others, memory is beyond the control of the one who is remembered. Lenaik's memory is in the hands of his daughters. Someone like Lefwin will probably be completely forgotten by history in the near future, despite her important role in pushing her lord to greatness. Some, like King Richard, will have an eternal black stain on their memory. Whether peace will reign, a triune kingdom of sisters, or they turn on each other and scatter their father's memory to the wind, England has forever been changed. Thank you for your time.